Compound interest is not a magic wand, it is a mathematical engine that remains stalled until you provide enough fuel to overcome the friction of time and inflation. If your monthly contributions fall below a specific capital threshold, the early stages of wealth creation remain invisible, leaving you to chase theoretical gains that will not materialize in a human timeframe. To move beyond $4 annual returns on a $50 index fund investment, you must identify the exact tipping point where compounding shifts from a mathematical curiosity to a functional wealth-building tool. Think of the financial world as an engine that requires a specific octane of fuel to actually turn over. We are often told that any amount of savings, no matter how microscopic, will eventually balloon into a fortune, but there is a structural defect in that promise that remains largely ignored. This is the uncomfortable reality of the scale requirement. Just as a massive cargo ship cannot be powered by a lawnmower motor, the mechanism of compounding possesses a baseline threshold. If your monthly input falls below this critical level, the gears essentially spin in place without generating any forward momentum. You are likely pouring your hard-earned capital into a system that, at your current volume, is mathematically incapable of moving the needle, yet no one wants to highlight this discrepancy because it challenges the popular narrative of effortless wealth. We have all seen the glossy projections where a few dollars a day somehow morphs into a six-figure retirement fund. However, when you open your brokerage app and compare your actual progress against those idealized trajectories, the discrepancy is jarring. You might be consistent, disciplined, and patient, but the math simply refuses to cooperate with your expectations. This is not a failure of your strategy, it is a fundamental size constraint. In the early chapters of your financial journey, the sheer volume of your monthly contribution acts as the primary lever for success, overshadowing almost every other variable. Without sufficient mass, the gravitational pull of compounding never takes hold. Consider the common advice to start with whatever you have, such as $50 a month into a standard index fund yielding an 8% annual return. By the end of a full year, your reward for 12 months of discipline is a meager $4 in gains. To put that in perspective, you likely spent more on the single beverage you sipped while reviewing your year-end statement than the entire market gave you back in interest. While the math is technically functioning, the result is so microscopic that it remains invisible to your standard of living. This creates a dangerous psychological rift. The mantra of starting small is often weaponized to suggest that a $10 monthly habit is a viable path to prosperity, but in practical terms, you would likely be 90 years old before that capital reached a point of relevance. This invisibility creates a psychological dead zone that lasts between 10 to 15 years. When you operate below the functional threshold, your portfolio feels stagnant, leading to the inevitable conclusion that the entire concept is an elaborate ruse. Humans are not evolutionarily designed to persist in behaviors that yield no perceptible reward. When you hit this invisible wall and see no tangible growth, the temptation to abandon the strategy becomes overwhelming. You assume the system is broken, when in reality, you simply haven't reached the escape velocity required to leave the atmosphere of insignificance. Does this mean the math is a lie? Not at all, but we must be brutally honest about what these numbers look like in the real world. If you commit $50 monthly at that 8% rate, 5 years of waiting nets you approximately $3,600. After a decade, you sit at $9,200, and even after 2 decades, you have only managed to scrape together $29,500. By the 30-year mark, you reach $74,500. While that is a respectable sum, it is nowhere near a functional retirement cushion in the modern economy. It is essentially a drop in the bucket. Now, observe the dramatic shift when you increase the volume to $200 every month. Maintaining that same 8% return, your 5-year total jumps to roughly $14,700. Within 10 years, you have $36,800. Fast forward 20 years and you are looking at $117,800, which finally blossoms into $298,000 after 3 decades. At this level, the math is no longer a theoretical exercise, it is a life-changing sum of nearly $300,000. This is the moment where the engine finally catches fire and begins to propel you forward. When you double that commitment to $400 per month, the acceleration becomes even more pronounced, reaching roughly $29,300 in just the first 5 years. By the 10-year mark, a consistent monthly commitment of $400 at an 8% yield accumulates to approximately $73,700. If you maintain that exact same pace for 2 decades, your capital grows to roughly $235,600, eventually surging to nearly $600,000, specifically $595,000, after 30 years of disciplined saving. It is vital to recognize that the interest rate remained a static variable throughout this entire timeline. The only lever pulled to generate that massive difference in outcome was the sheer volume of the monthly cash injection. This reveals a fundamental truth of the financial world. In the opening chapters of your wealth building journey, the percentage of return is practically white noise compared to the size of your contributions. Your own deposits act as the primary structural support for the first 10 years, providing the essential mass that the engine of compounding requires to eventually take over. Think of it like trying to heat a room with a single candle versus a furnace. An 8% gain on a $10,000 portfolio generates a mere $800, an amount that barely covers a weekend trip and certainly does not rewrite your financial destiny. However, that same 8% applied to $100,000 results in $8,000. That is a figure that carries weight, it feels tangible and significant. This is the secret behind why the affluent seem to expand their fortunes with effortless ease. It is not a matter of superior intellect or mystical market timing, but rather a simple matter of scale. A person holding $500,000 at a 7% return nets $35,000 annually without lifting a finger. Meanwhile, an investor with only $5,000 at that same 7% rate sees a return of $350 for the entire year, which is less than the cost of a single monthly car installment in many regions. The chasm between these two individuals is defined entirely by the magnitude of the base they are building upon. Consequently, the most urgent inquiry for any investor is not whether they should participate in the market, but how they can expand their capital base fast enough to make the growth palpable. In these formative stages, your personal savings rate is a far more powerful tool than your investment performance. Consider the common trap of chasing high-risk assets in search of a 15% or 20% return. If you have a $2,000 balance, a spectacular 15% gain only puts an extra $300 in your pocket. You could achieve that exact same financial result simply by contributing an additional $300 to your account through work or frugality, without exposing yourself to the dangers of a market collapse. There is a specific psychological and mathematical tipping point, usually found between $100,000 and $150,000 in total assets, where the momentum shifts. At $100,000 with an 8% yield, you are generating $8,000 a year purely from the existence of your money. This is the moment when the traditional image of a rolling snowball gathering its own weight finally becomes a reality. Your primary objective in the early years must be to reach that $100,000 milestone as rapidly as your budget allows. This is the threshold where compounding transitions from a silent, invisible background calculation into a visible force that accelerates your net worth independently. Unfortunately, many novices misunderstand this contribution versus return split. When they see their small accounts growing slowly, they falsely blame the interest rate and pivot toward speculative gambles like crypto or high volatility stocks. They believe jumping from 8% to 15% is the missing ingredient for their salvation. But let's run that math. Imagine doubling your investment performance from a standard 8% to a staggering 16% annual return over a 10-year stretch while contributing $200 every month. On the surface, the result of $52,200 compared to the $36,800 generated by the lower rate seems like a victory, as you have netted an extra $15,000. However, the hidden cost of this pursuit is a level of volatility that could realistically slash your holdings by 50% during a single market downturn. This degree of risk often triggers a survival instinct in investors, causing them to liquidate their positions at the exact moment prices bottom out, which effectively turns temporary paper losses into permanent financial scars. Now, consider a far more stable alternative. Instead of gambling on high-octane returns, you simply find a way to raise your monthly deposit from $200 to $350. By staying with a conservative 8% yield, that same decade leaves you with roughly $64,000. The math is undeniable. Boosting your input is not just a safer strategy, it actually generates more wealth than doubling your interest rate ever could when your starting balance is modest. In these formative years, you must accept that you are the primary engine of your own prosperity. The obsession with high-return moonshots is a mathematical distraction for the beginner because small balances are governed by the volume of your deposits, not the percentage of the market's growth. Your energy is much better spent on increasing your earning power or auditing your expenses to widen the gap between what you make and what you spend. Every extra dollar you force into the account provides more utility than a lucky trade because it carries zero risk. Think of your wealth-building journey as a collaborative effort where the roles of the partners shift over time. At the start, if you contribute $200 and the market adds $40 in a month, the $240 total growth is 83% your own sweat. You are doing the heavy lifting. But as you stay the course, the weight shifts. Once your pile reaches $50,000, that 8% annual return starts spitting out about $333 a month. Suddenly, your money is paying a significant portion of the rent for your future. By the time you hit $100,000, your returns are generating roughly $667 monthly. The tragic reason most people never see their investments do more work than they do is that they abandon the process during the quiet, grinding years. They fail to perceive the momentum that is building invisibly behind the scenes. To reach the summit, you have to recognize that wealth creation is a tale of two distinct eras. The first is the contribution phase, or the grind. During this period, your behavior is the only variable that truly moves the needle. Whether you get an 8% or a 9% return on a $300 monthly deposit is almost a rounding error over 10 years. However, moving that deposit from $300 to $500 creates a massive divergence in your final balance. You are the sole driver of the vehicle here. The second era is the compounding phase, which is the point where the math finally pulls ahead of your physical effort. This transition is the holy grail of finance, the moment where you can truthfully claim your portfolio earned more in a year than your salary. It feels as though a hidden switch has been flipped, and the momentum becomes self-sustaining. This is where your returns begin to outpace your contributions. If you are currently allocating $200 each month toward your future and manage to miraculously double your investment performance from 8% to 16%, the decade-long result is a balance of roughly $52,200 compared to the original $36,800. While a $15,000 gain is respectable, the sheer level of peril required to chase a consistent 16% return is staggering. It is the financial equivalent of trying to navigate a hurricane in a rowboat, where a single bad year can incinerate half of your life savings. This extreme volatility frequently triggers a psychological collapse, leading investors to abandon ship at the worst possible moment and cement their losses. Contrast this with a safer, high-volume approach, simply increasing your monthly deposit to $350 while maintaining a conservative 8% yield. Over those same 10 years, you end up with approximately $64,000. The math is blunt and undeniable. Elevating your contribution beats chasing a high-octane return rate almost every time because it generates more capital with significantly less systemic risk. In the initial stages of wealth building, you must realize that you are your own most productive asset. Your primary objective is not to find a magic investment but to become a high-capacity funding machine. The internal mechanics of compounding at low balances are dominated by what you put in, not what the market gives back. This is why the early years of your journey are effectively a contribution race rather than an investment contest. Think of your portfolio as a shared project between you and the market. If your account grows by $40 in returns this month and you deposit $200, you have essentially provided 83% of the total momentum. You are doing the heavy lifting. However, as your balance reaches certain milestones, the labor split begins to pivot. At $50,000, an 8% yield starts contributing roughly $333 a month from returns alone. By the time you reach $100,000, your money is working hard enough to generate $667 every single month. The tragedy for most beginners is that they quit before this transition becomes visible. They are stuck in phase 1, the contribution phase, where they feel like the engine doing all the grinding. They focus on the fact that an 8% return versus a 9% return on a $300 monthly budget makes a negligible difference over a decade. What they should be focusing on is that moving that $300 to $500 changes the entire trajectory of their lives. You must stop viewing compound interest as the strategy you are executing and start viewing it as the prize you earn for your persistence. It is the reward that waits for you after you have built a sufficient capital base. This base is not a switch that flips overnight, it is a mathematical threshold that usually sits between $100,000 and $200,000. Getting to this threshold quickly requires an aggressive commitment to contribution growth. If you only manage $100 a month, the $18,400 you accumulate over 10 years at an 8% return will feel mathematically invisible, even if it is technically real money. But if you can squeeze your budget, sell off unneeded items, or grow your income to hit a $500 monthly target, that 10-year picture explodes to roughly $91,000. At $1,000 per month, you cross the finish line with $184,000. This is the point where compounding finally stops being background noise and starts acting like a powerful tailwind at your back. It is not about shaming small budgets, life is expensive and inflation is real, but it is about being honest about the physics of money. If you stay at $50 a month, you are playing a 30-year game. If you hit $1,000 a month, you can dominate the game in under 10 years. Look at your current situation and ask yourself what it would take to find just $50 more this month. Because that $50 extra per month over 20 years at 8% can add tens of thousands of dollars to your future balance. Imagine treating your monthly investment contributions as a living organism that needs to mirror the very compounding behavior you expect from your bank balance. If you want your wealth to snowball, your discipline must also expand in scale. Small, rhythmic increases in what you set aside do not just add up, they multiply into a financial reservoir that far exceeds the modest appearance of those initial increments. This is not about a single heroic sacrifice but about the relentless accumulation of minor gains that eventually transform into a massive, undeniable force. Consider the cold reality of a typical monthly budget where an individual earns $3,000 after taxes. If that person allocates $150 to their portfolio, they have established a 5% savings rate. While that is a start, the true leverage lies in the ability to double that velocity. By aggressively auditing modern leaks like redundant digital subscriptions, frequent dining out, or impulsive luxury purchases, that contribution can jump to $300. This shift is not merely a mathematical adjustment, it is a structural redesign of your future. To make this work, you must categorize your investment contribution as a non-negotiable fixed bill, ranking it alongside your rent or electricity. Human nature dictates that we expand our desires to consume every cent available in our sight. If you wait until the end of the month to invest whatever is left over, you will almost certainly find that the remaining balance is exactly zero. The only defensive maneuver against this psychological trap is to move those funds out of your reach the moment your paycheck hits. By automating this transfer on payday, you are effectively paying your future self before the world can get its hands on your money, forcing your current lifestyle to adapt to the resources that remain. This philosophy must evolve alongside your career. Whenever a raise, a promotion, or a side hustle injects more cash into your life, the instinctual response is lifestyle inflation. Resist the urge to let your spending rise in a perfect 1-to-1 ratio with your new salary. Instead, divert a significant portion of every pay increase directly into your brokerage account. This strategy allows you to enjoy a slightly better quality of life today while simultaneously accelerating the date of your financial independence. The hidden engine of compounding is not a complex algorithm but the sheer stubbornness required to stay in the arena long enough for the mathematics to finally reveal its power. Wealth is rarely a sprint, it is an endurance test where the prize goes to those who refuse to exit the game before the math tips in their favor. This compounding effect applies to your internal discipline and confidence just as much as it applies to your capital. You must accept that the early stages of this journey are designed to feel agonizingly slow. A common mistake is to look at a titan of industry or a seasoned investor and feel inadequate, but you cannot compare the modest opening of your Chapter 1 to the climax of their Chapter 15. Every massive portfolio that currently generates life-changing returns was preceded by a decade of boring, invisible, and deeply frustrating growth. Social media platforms are flooded with the shiny results of success, yet they intentionally hide the 10-year grind of consistent contributions made during the years when nothing felt like it was working. Accessing the secondary phase of explosive growth is impossible without a total commitment to the foundational grind of the first phase. There are no loopholes, no shortcuts, and no exceptions to this rule. You cannot afford to quit simply because the numbers on your screen feel too small to matter right now. Every dollar you deploy is a silent soldier doing quiet, invisible work in the background of your life. Trust the math because the numbers do not have feelings and they do not lie. Stay in the game and be patient with the version of yourself that is still learning how to build. The beginning of the financial road is almost never discussed because of how painfully slow it actually is, but it is the only path that leads to the summit. If this perspective has shifted the way you view your capital, subscribe for more analysis.